now I'll invite Workshop 1, SDGs in Schools, for maximum 2 minutes with a gong.
Okay, on behalf of Workshop 1, I'd like to say a brief thank you to my co-creators of the workshop. It was a thrill to have students and teachers and lead practitioners from Beijing to talk and share ideas about schools across the globe. I'm inviting two of our students to actually present the outcomes, and over to Maya and Salome, who will talk about their group commitments.
So we discussed SDGs in school and how it affects primary, middle school, and high school. We made group commitments for the year. It first started off with exchange of contact information so we could link up to each other, follow-up communications and initiatives that we made.
We also tried to break down stereotypes. We talked about the fact that children need to be able to learn that they can, regardless of their gender, their race.
So we also reflected on progressive decisions over traditional versus outside of curriculum methods. Different kind of ways to teach students what we reflect in SDG Keepers.
Also to improve on the implementation phase of scaling up SDG education. How are you going to do it? Answering that how.
And not to forget the cultural relativity on how it's all very different in different countries and how we have to try to understand them before acting.
So it was great to bring together students of Ekelent International School Geneva and the Royal School of Beijing, who brought, I think, a really special dimension, Chair, to our workshop today. And I think we've come away with some interesting practical approaches to work collaboratively on a project going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to Workshop 2, SDGs in Universities. Do we have a, yes?
Hello, everyone. So for our workshop, we broke out into 3 groups discussing the themes of how do we bridge theoretical knowledge and action at the university level, and also we spoke a bit about democracy of knowledge and the state of, or the role of science and serious science in the SDGs. So I'm going to pass the floor to some of our participants to talk to you about some of the takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you. So some of the challenges we identified included the need for universities to value and engage with non-academic forms of knowledge, and to look at how we can innovate and be more equitable in the partnerships that we have within international partnerships that we forge within the academic community. And also to work to better understand the dynamics, the knowledge, the belief systems we need to engage with to affect policy change. Let's hand over some of the ideas for some potential solutions.
Okay, addressing these issues, we came up with a couple of ideas. One is in the context of generating new knowledge internationally in collaborations to generate something like a Gini index that measures how much individual contributors actually benefit from the knowledge that was generated, because it's very often that the Western world benefits more from the knowledge generated than people, let's say, in Africa. Another idea for the last point was to kind of create something like a map of knowledge instead of kind of just going somewhere and teaching everything we want them to know, to assess what knowledge is actually there. For instance, in the context of SDGs, how do people locally actually define the SDGs, and then it's like this, identify lacks of knowledge in the SDGs, and then we can target where the best resources for the knowledge are and where the biggest gaps in knowledge are, for instance. And the third point was we talked quite a bit about how to create new materials that's accessible to everybody in a more creative manner in universities themselves.
Okay. Additionally, we thought of, if we want to scale SDG education, we want less theory and more action. We want hands-on learning and follow-through. We're calling this design thinking plus, where a follow-up component exists in order to continue the value creation. We want to commit to design thinking as a methodology and approach. Additionally, remember this, when we're looking for the best ideas, it's not always the new ideas. Let's scale what's already working and resist the tyranny of the new.
you so much, workshop 2. And now we have workshop 3, continuing education on SDGs.
So thank you very much. First, I want to acknowledge that the workshop was actually not facilitated by me, but by Yunfei. But I was requested to do the report back to the plenary. So I will try to be very concise. First of all, in terms of, I think the sort of the challenges that we've been discussing is that continuing education is a very useful avenue for trying to scale up the education for SDGs. One way may be mainstreaming the SDGs across the existing offerings, activities, and some efforts are being made by some actors, for example, by mapping what already is being taught and then referencing this to the SDGs, relevant SDG targets, indicators, etc. At the same time, there is a recognition so that we need to go beyond if you are to reflect the integrated nature of the SDGs, use systemic thinking approaches, etc., to better understand the interactions between different areas and break the silos between different disciplines. Then the other element that was being really discussed in depth is how do we move from conceptual things, theory, to practice, and then to actual implementation, the application of knowledge and skills, and then institutional and policy change. And then another important challenge that has been raised was how do we also reach local level stakeholders. In terms of the suggestions that were made, the first one was related to the importance of training for trainers, and more specifically, what we were suggesting was that there is a need to ensure that those key actors that play a significant role in disseminating knowledge about SDGs, they should understand and master well those aspects that are relevant pedagogically so that they can integrate these aspects in their training programs and activities. And finally, the last point, it's the importance of learning reinforcement, action planning, and then follow-up on whether the knowledge and skills are being applied or not.
Thank you, bravo. Okay, workshop 4 on online education for SDGs.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank my participants for being very engaged. And we've discussed about the opportunities that we have in terms of online education for SDGs. There are already many existing initiatives in terms of providing online education through massive open online courses and other innovative solutions in terms of delivering online education. For example, in China, they use the WeChat in terms of communicating to participants about the new course and how getting a notification when you have to finish or complete the course. And also there are also other challenges that exist in terms of delivering online education. How do we ensure that the courses are inclusive, and also how to apply this key principle of leaving no one behind. There are already courses that are designed for not only one target audience, but also for different target audience at the same time. At the same time, the key issue is to make sure that we deliver basic knowledge. We ensure that the basic knowledge is provided to different kinds of population groups, and also we also ensure that the quality knowledge is also provided. And by quality knowledge, we mean by tailoring the content of the course to different target audience, so it will be more interesting, more user-friendly, and with the advancement of technologies, it's very you have to be very creative and innovative, and you have the opportunities to be innovative with the advancement of the technologies that exist and that are being developed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we move on to workshop 5, hands-on learning and SDGs. makerspaces, Fab Labs.
So we had a really nice discussion about all the action we were taking about SDGs and how they have hands-on education. And then we raised the question about having a global repository for SDG, but we decided to switch because it's too hard to build up. And we all agree that hands-on education, Fab Lab, Makerspace, BioLab has a huge potential to tackle SDGs. And we raised some questions. So, like, how do we develop a process to take forward and scale up ideas developed in hands-on workshop between different communities? Could be humanitarian, education, organization. But honestly, we were running out of time to bring a solution. So the idea is we need more Trialogue workshop and more often.
Okay, thank you very much. Workshop number 5. On to workshop 6, challenge-based learning for SDGs, global competitions.
So our workshop was about challenge-based learning, and I had 4 participants with these 2 nice ladies. Challenge-based learning basically is a framework for learning while solving a real-world challenge, and we will talk about existing initiatives, opportunities, and also we had group commitments. For the opportunities, we say that challenge-based learning is a very good opportunity to get kids and young students engaged to raise awareness about SDGs, because it's an activity where you learn by doing. So we thought it's interesting to adjust the challenge-based learning courses in a way where, we put it in perspective of solving real world challenge, and that tackles SDG goals. We had 2 initiatives, interesting initiatives. The first one is to make CBL challenge-based learning, where students could learn about solving a problem on a small scale, and then from these courses you can build a universal course that is replicable and scalable. Another initiative is do a matching between the existing education system and the CBL courses, where people can learn about something theoretically and then go to do an activities that is related to an SDG goal where they can learn about it. And we had some personal group commitments, so I would leave the ladies to share it with you.
So as a group, we decided that we wanted to work harder on sharing our ideas and not being scared of what we think about them and not letting our opinions change.
Also to try to eradicate the stereotypes in most schools that the sports that the guys play are less equal to the sports that the girls play. And to learn more about CBL and learn how I can implement it in the way that reduce a disaster of accidents.
And just to conclude, as a group, we learned that the most important part is obviously just participation and working as a group together, because if one person starts something, then it'll start expanding. And yeah.
So can you give my first
Thank you very much. Thank you, workshop 6. We move on to workshop 7 was not, no commitment, that's right. No commitment from workshop 7, we saved time, but they had fun, I'm sure. Workshop 8, new technologies for SDGs education, AI and VR.
We also didn't have any commitments, but we also had a great conversation, and a lot of the themes that I've heard already we picked up on as well. So we really talked largely about VR as an opportunity to bring education alive and to create a deeper emotional experience of what's being learned. So we talked about, within the group, there were people who had it within climate change, in oceans, psychology, mental health, peace building. So it was a very wide range of applications of VR to different areas of learning. We discussed that it really has a real potential to help people move from just idea to further engagement on an emotional level, and then the challenge was how do we move to real action? So we explored that a bit. We also talked about the limitation in accessibility. So VR at this point requires technology that is not accessible in all parts of the world, and so we talked about that as being a potential frontier area. We also talked about that the empathetic response that can be triggered, the emotional response that can be triggered, can sometimes be traumatic. So we need to be aware of that in designing application. We talked about how the tech is getting more accessible, but it's still costly. And that it includes the downside of tech in many contexts, and addictiveness and spending more time on devices, but that because it's often so physically engaged, you can't do it too much. So that's potentially a mitigating factor. We also talked about in terms of how do we scale more, and how do we address these challenges? What is the next frontier? We talked about really this is a frontier area, and there's more potential within it already. How do we introduce these tools beyond general publics to decision-making spaces in particular? And also, how do we address data protection? So that was our conversation.
Thank you very much. Bravo, Workshop 8. And we move on to Workshop 9, Scientific Diplomacy, Policy, and the SDGs.
Hello, everyone. We were quite a large group. We were also lucky to have 3 high school students from the international school. I wish I had told them to come with me, actually. I apologize for not doing that. We wanted to share 3 results from the workshop. The first one is we were thinking there are actually lots of successful projects, institutions that already exist, and that can be used as role model or can just be more supported. So one example for us, based on our experience, is the CERN as an international organization. Examples of projects include the CrowdShed project in Senegal. It's a local project to provide mobile technology for people in remote areas. Here in Geneva, at the CIRA, there is the Humanitarian Encyclopedia to provide a common vocabulary for humanitarian aid. And so all these successful projects could be promoted further. We were also discussing the difference between those international organizations with an international agenda and national institution with a national agenda. And some of us are in Confucius Institutes. And our experience is that it actually helps because you are forced to understand the other side, to reach some kind of shared understanding, also the Cervantes Institute and so on. So this would be like doable goals. Then more general ideas, we think there's clearly a big need for more bottom-up inclusive research, cross-level communication. The students in the room reminded us that we need to listen to the youth. And I think the fact that so many people were in the street the last few days is the proof that it comes from there. We need them, especially the women. There's a stronger motivation and energy that can be used as a promotion for these goals. And the CrowdShed project in Senegal is another example of bottom-up. So then to apply these 2 things, what's doable, what is bottom-up. So for ourselves, we have our own projects, but as a group, we decided that when we go home, when we go back to work, we will tell people about what we did here and about the SDGs, because simply in our work, many people just don't know about the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Workshop 9. And we move on to Workshop 10, EdTech Startups for SDGs.
Hi, I'm a member of this group. So basically, we decided to divide the structure, the workshop, in 4 main areas. We started with a definition of the background of what's EdTech startups, went through the different legal forms. This startup might be for profit or social entrepreneurs, and so non-for-profit. The funding is the most important part of this kind of projects, or maybe they can go through bootstrapping. This is the right time to speak about sustainability for startups, or maybe more suitable for large corporations. And we came with a lot of good ideas in this part. Then we went through some real example of EdTech startups for SDGs, something like Kiron, Break, Project Access, ELSA Speak, KioKit, and Eduction. We had also a call with Project Access to understand their point of view, to check the state of arts, and to understand their challenges. Then we talk about the opportunities. So SDGs can create more opportunities for EdTech startups. And we said yes, because of course, thanks to the technology, SDGs can be spread more easily through all the globe. Then we went through more opportunity in terms of funding, because maybe speaking more about SDGs, more, let's say, sustainable based investor might look at this kind of project to finance. And also a growing initiative, growing number of EdTech startups might also influence policymakers in being on their radar. And then we finish with our commitment in taking action between our member of this workshop, and we share what to do, what's next in order to increase the awareness about SDGs. And we will follow up in 1 month.
Okay, thank you very much. Workshop 10. Now on to, workshop 11, that's me. Time myself. Right, so there were some cards. Thank you. So those two, thank you. Right, so we were a very small, cozy group, and we had a lot of M&Ms. We discussed really two things. So Kaylee Taylor, who was in our group from the SDG Lab, was talking about how SDG Lab has been trying to bring together the two sides of Lake Geneva. This side, the SDG side, and the other side, the banking, finance, and investment side, and looking at new forms of sustainable investment, impact investment, and so on. And then we also had two students from the University of Geneva, Sofia and Shieseko, and they were basically working on a project to find out, a project inspired by one of my colleagues here, Thomas Maya, to find out how you could ascribe the value of people's contributions to SDG projects in a more fair way, in a more detailed way, inspired by a platform you might have heard, Git or GitHub, where coders can actually measure quite accurately how much work they've contributed to a project. So this was really the starting point for this discussion, was, how can we give the right incentives to young people to get involved in these hands-on and challenge-based projects. If they work very hard on a project and they don't get anything out of it, they'll be disappointed and they won't do it again. This is a problem we see sometimes in hackathons and other forms of challenge-based activities. So are there market-based systems that could inspire us? So we discussed also with Reda Sadki from the Learning Foundation, and Adrian Oleszewski, who was with us from the Global Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. How could we perhaps bring these two aspects of finance together? And the conclusion was, the commitment was to look into whether we could actually inject some forms of impact investment into these experiments with online detailed attribution of credit to people in open source projects. So to see whether we could get an online market-based system to be stimulated by some form of impact investment. So that was our conclusion, and I think we've written some postcards to ourselves about that, and we'll see down the line where that leads to. So thank you to the team that put that together. Next is workshop 12, Lego Serious Play for SDG Education.
Hi everyone, thank you for contributing to our workshop. We decided to change the rules of the game, so we did 2 workshops rather than 1. So thank you everybody for coming along and building docs. What we have here is a model of everybody's contributions. We asked everybody to build a doc and also explain to us why they came into this room, the challenges they brought with them, and some of the action initiatives that they were walking away from this room with. And we're going to basically map those in a cognitive map, look and see how we can actually integrate them and look for adding finance and resources to them to allow for scalability. Yeah, so that was the lunch session.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Christina. I'll follow up. We'll stay within our 2 minutes. We had one participant in our room in the workshop where we built these models that you see on the table, and you are happily invited to come up here afterwards to see them, who reminded us that her 2-year-old son is still playing with the bigger versions of Lego, that's Duplo, but she's looking forward to the time when she can actually play with him with Legos. We had a small group in the 2-hour workshop, and it was all about building models that you see here, individual models to engage around SDG education in the widest sense. And so each one of us built an individual model, and then we came up with connections between these models that you can see here. And also in the third part, we came up with commitments. My colleague Shamsa is going to talk about them now.
The key thing that we learned about our commitments was what we were trying to achieve was very similar, and there was a lot of commonality. And so consequently, we had 3 key commitments that we wanted to make as a group. The first was to provide a platform for collaboration through Unitar. The second was to build a piece of thought leadership with the participants of the workshop itself around scaling and activating the SDGs. And the final action point or commitment was to take the learning from the nonprofit sector to the corporate world around the SDGs using Future-Proof World. So those were our 3 commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And those that didn't build any docs are welcome to do that after this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Workshop number 12. Workshop 13, Hackathons and SDG Education.
Hello everyone, my name is Thomas Meyer, and I'm representing this workshop on hackathons and SDG education. We were all a bunch of hackathons fans in this workshop, and it was really nice, sort of like homogeneity in the topic, but also people from the corporate environment who do that professionally, people from an association called Open Geneva that organizes a festival in Geneva, a festival of hackathons. So for those who don't know, hackathon is really a short moment of time, from a few hours to a couple of days, trying to tackle big challenges in order to find practical solutions to these challenges. And we had a moment of reflection about this idea that actually, you know, the SDGs are so big, sometimes it can be overwhelming when you see like the 17 goals, all the sub goals and indicators. You can say, well, I'm just like, I'm lost, I'm not going to do anything, there's too much. And the hackathon can be a good moment where you can refocus and just do something that you really think is going to be actionable and you can act upon. So it's a lot of self-empowerment, self-reliance, and also collective intelligence. And we saw like this is bringing a lot of opportunities for education, because people can just like learn by doing in a short time. It can go beyond just high school or academia. It can be just like people doing that for a couple of hours, couple of days in corporate. And that's what we found was really cool. We also found that there are zillions of initiatives that resemble hackathons all over the world, also engaging world cities the same way as we do in Geneva, but different formats. And we found that it would be very interesting to know more about like all this chaos is organized. So the first commitment we've made is that we're going to sort of like survey both with the people from the private sector and the people from the university and the people from the association Open Geneva, survey what are the other best practices that are really worth noting in this world, and try to make better sense, have a self-reflection about like what we are doing and make it more adaptable to the SDGs. And the second commitment is try to make a festival, we are here in Geneva, Open Geneva, and make it sort of like ripe enough for the SDGs to become influential and to be
and to be repeated or maybe used as a blueprint for replication in other cities. And I called to a friend of mine who is a professor at ETH Zurich, who is not here, who is launching something called the Climate City Olympics. And the idea is to have cities compete on the best practices to make the world a better place. And we hope that, our blueprint will be the blueprint for the role model for organizing this Climate City Olympics.
Thank you, Workshop 13. That's it. That was